All right, guys, welcome to the Goss. What's going on? What's the Goss? What's the news? Today I sit down with my dad and we talk about what's going on in Australia as well as in other places in the world. The whole point of these episodes, guys, is to get us to talk about a range of different topics, as well as a bunch of different topics that are relevant to your life, that are in the news, that you can hopefully read about, learn about, and form your own opinions about these topics, and then go off and talk about them in your day-to-day life. So, today we talk about African black rhino numbers on the rise again because conservationists are working hard. We talk about how winemakers in Australia are salvaging smoke-tainted grapes this year after the worst bushfire season in Australian history. So these grapes have been affected by the smoke from the fires, but Australian winemakers are being very creative in order to save this wine vintage. Then we get on to talk about desert frogs and how there are hundreds of thousands of frogs in the desert and their relationship with water. And we also talk about the Lake Eyre Basin in Australia and why that is such an interesting ecosystem. And then lastly, we talk about the trade in fake orphans in third world countries and sort of the ethics of Western countries like Australia giving money to charities that support this sort of stuff. Don't forget, if you want the transcripts, if you want the MP3s, if you want the full episode videos and everything like that, make sure to sign up for the premium podcast or the academy memberships at aussieenglish.com.au. And without any further ado, guys, let's get into this episode. Smack the kookaburra on the bum. Let's begin. So African black rhino numbers are now on the rise after efforts from conservationists have paid off.
That's southern black rhinos, having the northern black rhino gone extinct.
Yeah, well, that's the sad aspect. But numbers have increased by nearly 800 over 6 years.
Yeah.
Had no idea that they had that kind of reproductive power.
Yeah.
Rhinos, man.
Yeah.
So annual growth rate of 2.5% from 2012 to 2018, and they've grown from 4,800 to 5,600. They were nearly driven to extinction by poaching, and to save the species, animals are being relocated from now established populations to new areas to increase the species range and also avoid interbreeding. But they're having trouble. I think they've moved 11 black rhinos to Kenya's Tsavo East National Park from Nairobi, but all 11 died because they were drinking salty water, and a lion killed one. So poachers are targeting these for their horns, obviously, which are demanded in Asia, and the price will remain high whilst the demand's there. And poaching, though, is on the decrease. They killed 1,300 of them in 2015 and only 900 in 2018. So I guess as numbers increase, where do you put these animals, right? So even if they were to now explode the population, what do you do in terms of where to put them?
Well, there's plenty of places now. This is speaking without any experience whatsoever, because I've never been to East Africa.
Black rhino conservation
or in just the general environment in East Africa. But there's plenty of places that they used to be in that actually haven't changed. It's not like we have a human population boom that is suddenly building, villages and towns in eastern Kenya or in Tanzania and so on, that we're suddenly go, oh, sorry, we're going to move this town out of here and create more open range area for rhinos. So I think there are plenty of places where they used to be that they will still naturally increase. The challenge we have when poaching is the major form of death is that we don't know what the carrying capacity of that country is for those animals. If we didn't have humans as effectively their only predator, because you're going to have a lion that catches the odd one, but that'll be a young one. There's no way a 3-ton rhino is going to get taken by a lion. The lion's not even going to try, let alone compete.
Pretty brave lion.
They're going to do a fair bit of damage, but so we don't know what that carrying capacity is, which means that we don't know whether or not that country will handle them. You've got to assume that it was okay 200 years ago. And it probably still is, but we don't know, and that's the big challenge we have. If we're going to reduce poaching, hopefully and ideally to zero, then what does that mean? And it might not be where do we put them. It might mean that we just put down. It's not like these national parks in East Africa have got great big fences around them and said, look, we put your little rhino herd over here. You've got to stay there. They'll go wherever they like. And so
you don't tell rhinos what to do.
Exactly. He's a pretty good wall that you've got to build.
Have you been
rhinos
to the
don't
zoo?
Swim very well, so putting a river in there is okay. But so I think we'll find a way of having that natural population control. If it's allowed to happen. But it's a complex issue because if we then start having, if we double the number of rhinos, does that have any effect on humans?
Yeah.
And if humans are the ones who are directly saying we're going to increase the number of rhinos, then they're doing it at the expense of other humans. Then you've got to start to question why. What's more important, a rhino's life or a human's life?
It comes back, though, too, surely to finding an economic reason to have the rhinos. So you have to go to these countries and foster the economics of it, whether it's tourism or even if you were to, say, farm the rhinos, which is probably pretty controversial, but at least then you have a reason to keep them alive and money that can be spent maintaining their populations. And you would imagine if you were farming them, you could just chop the horns off when they're
that's what
drugged.
One of the early strategies was for reducing poaching was... rangers were actually removing horns from rhinos so that people wouldn't be out shooting them because there's no reason to.
But it's pretty annoying, isn't it? Because it's almost like putting bigger locks on your doors because there's heaps of thieves and the police just can't be screwed taking care of the thieves.
Yeah.
You kind of like...
Exactly. But that was one of the strategies, and apparently it worked reasonably well. So at least in the early stages, we were allowing those rhinos to get to reproductive age and reproducing rather than killing them off as soon as the horn was big enough. There's a bunch of those things that are sitting in the background and challenges for it. But what was your original question?
I guess there wasn't one. We were sort of just talking about it. But why are animals like these poached so heavily in Africa? Do you think that it's a combination of things like corruption, the state of the economies over there, as well as this pressure from Southeast Asia mainly?
Well, it's pressure from Asia.
From Asia.
When you've got one culture that is willing to pay huge amounts of money for a substance, whether it be taking heroin or cocaine
it is
from
interesting.
Colombia.
In America, that's cocaine, and in China, it seems to be parts of animals.
Or if it's taking rhino horns and tiger's testicles.
Yeah.
And then there's a motivation for people to go and do it. And it's not like we have people from Hong Kong travelling to Kenya to shoot these rhinos and taking the horn and travelling back. It's local people in Kenya who are doing it. They have a social economic motivation to do it. These are people who are extremely poor, and if they can make money by doing something that's illegal, hell, we've got crime here. We have people who will break into houses and steal things.
It's weird, isn't it?
Melbourne. So
in Africa, I've heard that a lot of the time the poachers are actually the protectors of the animals when there's money to protect them. But when they lose their jobs, they turn to poaching because, hey, I need money to feed my family.
Yeah, and guess what?
And I know the animals.
About the animals and where they are.
Yeah, so it's almost like, make sure you pay the police or they'll start robbing you.
Yeah.
But do you think it's more effective to try and tackle this top down or bottom up?
I think the only way it'll work is both.
Yeah. So you try and lift up and give jobs to people in Africa and make it so that they don't have to rely on money from Asia to do this. But then you need to also educate people in Asia and suggest or show them that the damage it's doing and the fact that it's probably not helping you maintain an erection to do lines of
not probably
shredded up.
There is absolutely zero. You might as well chew your own fingernails because guess what?
It's the same stuff. Yeah. It's really sad, but I hope that we stop it eventually, but I think the tragic thing might be that you need to work out a way of working the rhinos into the economy.
Yeah, you do. And there's a lot of that going on in certainly South Africa, Southern Africa and East Africa, not just the country South Africa.
Yeah.
In those countries where, and it's not just rhinos, it's elephants as well, where part of the solution is to remove the socio-economic motivation for people to commit those crimes.
Yeah.
And so there is tourism. Tourism is a huge industry in those areas, particularly in poor East African countries. Almost the only thing they have going for them is wealthy Western people wanting to pay a lot of money to go and see these animals. Yeah. So it is in their interest to do that.
Well, until they get a shitload of mines set up to start stripping all of the uranium and iron and whatever else they have there under the soil, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I was talking to Kel about this recently, and I'm sure it'll interest a lot of the listeners. I don't know how much you know of it, but what do you think it is? I've been sort of beating my head against the wall in terms of the corruption in Brazil and South America more broadly. We've been watching the TV show Narcos recently, so that's the Colombian drug war, but the most recent one's on Mexico, and they started with cannabis, and then they started getting into cahoots with the Colombians to move the cocaine through Mexico into America. But sort of more broadly than that, why are these countries so corrupt when America and Canada are arguably, of the same age? They've come from very similar cultures that colonized those countries. They've had very similar histories in terms of the colonization. The same with even Australia and New Zealand. There've been, indigenous people here. There's lots of resources. How come we end up with countries like Brazil, which is about the same size, if not bigger than America, probably more fertile and more able to create wealth, in the position it is when it's of an even older age than America? What is it? When it has a Western-ish government, why do certain countries like that maintain such high levels of corruption, whereas others don't? Because you can imagine, sorry to make it such a long question.
It's going to be an easy answer. But
Australia wasn't always, as anti-corrupt as we are. We still have levels of corruption, but you can imagine a few hundred years ago, we were probably just as corrupt as any other country in the world in terms of having the upper class and the lower class, at heads, and the upper class doing whatever they want. The same with Britain, for sure, right, in terms of corruption. I was reading about the First Fleet, and you learn about so much shit going on behind the scenes. But how did we pull ourselves out of that, and why haven't countries like those in South America maintained that same level with us, in your opinion?
I don't know. You heard it here first. Look, and that sounds like a flippant response, but obviously it's a highly complex anthropological question. I'm sure there are probably hundreds of PhDs that have been written by sociologists and anthropologists on this, and I haven't read any of them, so I don't know. Yeah, right. And it's a really difficult one to answer. You can't sort of nail anything, and we talked about this last week, so I've done a little bit of thinking about it, and I still haven't come up with an answer. But you can't even look at anything else that you would think might be other than purely socioeconomic. Poorer countries tend to be more corrupt.
Yeah,
on average. If you're a highly wealthy country where every one of your citizens is well off, and there aren't many of them, there's a few, then there's virtually no corruption. And you could put most of the countries that you've mentioned in there into that category. So when you have a large proportion of the population that are poor, there's more motivation on them to be involved in crime, and therefore there is more motivation for people who are wealthy to start running crime.
And discriminate against the lower classes, right?
Maybe discriminate against them, but also to manipulate them.
Yeah.
There aren't too many drug lords who are out shooting people in the street.
They get other people
to do it for them because they pay them a lot of money in comparison to what that person can earn as a cab driver in Bogota, in Colombia.
Do you think some of the biggest issues are that the people in Australia, for instance, you could probably be born to one of the poorest families here, but the government effectively guarantees your right to get educated.
Yes.
And you can pull yourself out of that situation.
And you've got access to infrastructure. You can live in the poorest, most isolated place in Australia. There will still be roads in and out.
Yeah.
You will still have access to healthcare. In fact, if you need a doctor, they'll fly in for you. There will be schools that you're available for. Even if you can't get them, then there's the old school of the air where, back in the old days, you'd get on a radio and get your education from remotely from a teacher that way. So Australia and many other countries are effectively set up well for even the people who are their poorest. In developing countries, what we used to call back in the olden days, third world countries, I never understood what the second world was.
That's what I was going to ask. We've got first world and third. Where's the second?
Yeah, the second was the sort of step to the first, but I think the step was either via corruption or whatever else. But those countries that have a significant proportion of their population being poor, I think that's one element to it. But there's almost nothing else, because you could look. Brazil has a highly sophisticated democratic system. It's one of the only countries in the world, like Australia, that has compulsory voting.
Yeah.
And so you look at it and go on that basis. Well, it's not an electoral system. It's not like their democracy doesn't work, but corrupt people tend to get elected. How are they getting elected? It's not the system that's the problem.
Yeah.
There are plenty of countries in the world where there isn't that sort of democracy, and corrupt people get into power purely just by demanding it.
Well, I guess the easiest thing is to see how it continues, right? Because you get into a corrupt government, then there's going to be a lot of pressure on you to maintain that corruption, because you don't want to be the one that says, how about we start doing things the right way, because you'll be and killed.
You're also probably got there by the fact that you're making a lot of money out of the corruption.
So how did countries like Australia become or lose so much of that corruption? Were there things that we did in our past?
Well, we did. If you look at one of your relatives and one of mine, William Bligh, who was the 5th, I think, Governor of New South Wales.
Yay!
Yay, there we go. Another one of my books. Yeah.
He was actually a relative.
Yeah. Not directly. We're related to his wife.
Oh, okay.
But
we're the same race as him.
Same race as him. Yeah.
He's English.
We walk on 2 legs.
That's it.
He effectively got overthrown as the governor.
Didn't he hide behind his bed and get dragged out?
Yeah, allegedly. And who knows? In the early 19th century, there were newspapers.
The victors write the history, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you're always going to make the person look worse than they actually were.
Apparently, he was dragged kicking and screaming out from under his bed where he'd been hiding.
Yeah. And look, at the time, Government House was not this huge multi-storey mansion with a brick wall around it and security guards. It was just a house on a hill
with a front door.
With a front door. And so you knock on the door and say, come on, Will, you're out of here.
Yeah.
So he got overthrown. Yeah. And he was one of the more corrupt ones.
Was that the Rum Rebellion?
The Rum Rebellion.
We could probably talk about this later.
Oh, yeah, that's not news.
But effectively, back in the colony, they were being paid in rum, right?
Well,
there was
rum
no
became
money at
the currency.
The currency was grog, was booze.
And it really wasn't rum
drinks.
as we understand it.
No, watered down crap.
Yeah. Basically, it was alcohol. It became, because you could make it really easily, and you could import stuff to make it really easy. You couldn't grow much of your own. But there was a shift in power. And so it was effectively a military coup.
Yeah, which is the only one in our history, apparently.
It is, yes. And so I think very early on, we had that situation of having either by stealth, as in just political manoeuvring, to get rid of people who were corrupt, or we had, in that one case, where Bligh got thrown out, literally dragged kicking and screaming out of front of his bed and thrown out. And obviously that was, when we had, probably 10,000 people in Australia. I don't know what the actual numbers were. I'd be very surprised if it was more than 25,000 in what we now call Australia. So it really was a few people in, wealthy people and a few of the military just saying, look, this is ridiculous.
So it's almost like you need it to have happened in the early stages.
How do you, and look, I'll be completely political at the moment. How do you get rid of Donald Trump?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
you shoot him, right?
Yeah, well, and I'm not recommending crime as a solution.
But what else do you do?
But
he didn't get the votes to get into where he got. He manipulated the system.
Yeah, he got in by manipulating the system. And once you're in, it becomes that. And certainly in the United States, even in Australia, I think our current Prime Minister is incompetent.
Yeah.
And that's got nothing to do with which side of politics he sits on.
Well, he's just a muppet. He's an idiot.
He is simply unable to make decisions now when we're in a health crisis around the world. Our country is being run by the Premier of Victoria and the Premier of New South Wales because they are just saying, no, I don't care what Australia says, we're going to do this now, and then the rest of Australia follows suit. And that's a sad place to be in. But our Constitution has no way of, as a country, us getting rid of them. There's only one person in this country that can get rid of the Prime Minister.
Governor-General.
The Governor-General.
And he's done it once.
Yeah, the
bit more history for you guys.
Oh, yeah, we'll do that one day. And I lived through that. That was, my
do you want to just drop the names quickly and the nutshell review of what happened?
We'll do another episode on this one. But, look, in 1972, a Labor government had been elected, having been out of power for more than a decade. And they got elected on a whole lot of social reform that needed to happen. and their catch cry was, "It's time that we have to get in."
And this was Gough Whitlam.
This is Gough Whitlam, who was the leader of the opposition. He became the Prime Minister. Within 3 years, he had made a lot of those changes, huge changes, that many of which, like Medicare, universal health care for Australians.
Was he the one who brought through free tertiary education for your generation?
For my generation.
Yeah, Dad and Mum went through university without paying
I was
a
on
dime.
a scholarship, so I would have got it anyway. My generation went through. Anybody who had and it was competitive, so it wasn't just everybody went to university, which it effectively is now. But if you had the scores to get into what were effectively capped numbers in any course, you could go for free. And so that came in. He got us out of the Vietnam War. There's a whole bunch of those things. In the end, he was borrowing a lot of money from overseas to do it. And the opposition went to the Governor-General and said, "We don't believe that. We think this is unstable economically and we want to get rid of him." And the Governor-General agreed and sacked. You don't have to sack the Prime Minister.
He had permission, right, from the Queen.
Effectively, he has to actually, by our Constitution, the Queen is our head of state.
So the Queen is the one who sacked him,
The
really.
Governor-General, who is no longer with us, the Queen still is, but the Queen gave him permission to do it. Now, it was his choice. The Queen is never going to say no.
Yeah.
She is literally the titular head.
But there's been a few videos going around saying, Your Majesty, could you please help us in our current predicament and get rid of ScoMo?
Get rid of ScoMo.
You did it back then for nothing. Could you do it now with the most incompetent Prime Minister arguably in history?
That's right. So the Governor-General sacked the Parliament, or sacked the government, and he installed the Leader of the Opposition as the interim Prime Minister, and then immediately called an election.
And what was the line from Gough Whitlam? May God save
Australia. And no, it was actually, may God save the Queen, because nothing will save the Governor-General. And in fact, he was right. The Governor-General became a pariah in our society very quickly.
Yeah, that was a shit decision.
Oh, it was.
But anyway, back to corruption, I guess it is. Yeah, it is one of those difficult things. You need the people to rise up and change it, right?
You do. And look, we spent some time in Ecuador a few years ago on a holiday, and speaking to people in Ecuador, they were very proud of their current, and I don't think he still is, I have to look it up, their current president, to the point where they changed the constitution. Ecuador used to have this rule that I think it was 2 sessions, but it was 10 years. You couldn't be president for more than 10 years. So this guy was previously president. He went off and, he was already very wealthy. So that in itself helps, that you don't need to be corrupt if you're already a squillionaire. And he went off to the United States and he worked in the IT sector and blah, blah, blah. And he came back to Ecuador, and Ecuadorians effectively by popular vote changed the constitution. They held a referendum. They changed the constitution to change the law so that he could come back as president. And he did.
But it was only for a little time, wasn't it, to fix a few things?
He came back and then he said, right, I'm done.
Tapping out,
and
guys.
He made some amazing social decisions and so on, and we can talk about that another time. This is about Australia, not Ecuador, but hello to all my Ecuadorian friends. But in discussing that with people around Ecuador, and they were very happy to talk about their politics at the time because it was working for them, they said that being the president of Ecuador is one of the riskiest jobs that you can possibly imagine, because more than half of them in the history of Ecuadorian politics, more than half of them have been unseated either by being assassinated or by being sacked.
Yeah.
And so in that case, we don't like what the president's doing, we just shoot him. And so many countries that happens in.
I'd like to have a leader who doesn't want to be there. Who has the skills to be there, but ultimately doesn't want to stay there. And
they don't want a lifetime leader.
This is a big problem with the Roman Empire, right? That quite often the best emperors that they had were the ones that didn't really want the job or didn't want to maintain it, right? And they were like, all right, I'm going to hand it over after a certain amount of time. The worst ones were the ones that
want to get
hunted
re-elected
for it. Yeah. Next story I had, and we can probably turn this into 2 episodes because we're at an hour and 20 minutes. I've got a lot of good stories. I wanted to go through these. Winemakers have gotten really creative in Australia, and they're salvaging smoke-tainted grapes after the Australian bushfire. Did you see this story?
I did, yeah. What a ripping story.
Yeah, so disastrous wine vintage from 2019, 2020. It's been horrible because the wine grapes have been tainted by smoke from the huge amount of bushfires which have happened around a lot of the places that grow wine. So we've had many wine vines, completely burnt out. And those that weren't were smoke-tainted. And the smoke-affected wine tastes like an ashtray, effectively, for obvious reasons. So we had a winemaker named Mr. Cosned, who's trialling 3 different techniques. So he's been harvesting a few small batches of grapes, and he has these 3 sort of methods of harvesting: hand-picking, chilling, and whole bunch pressing, which quickly removes the smoke-infused skins. Then he has pressing, leaving the skins on for a long time, which ends up being the worst-case scenario. And the other one was machine harvesting. So the samples were all tested by a sensory panel to detect smoke taint, and the panel met weekly and sniffed something like 300 samples and marked them on a scale of 1 to 10. And they helped determine the best method. And the first method was the best one: hand harvesting white wine grapes, chilling them, and then a whole bunch pressing them. The only problem was that you're down 50% of your production in terms of how quickly you can do it.
Yeah, but 50% or no percent.
That's the trade-off.
Yeah, the trade-off is we can either just just churn these grapes back into the soil.
G'day, mate. That was the first half of this episode of The Goss. If you would like to continue watching or continue listening to this episode, make sure that you sign up for the premium podcast or Academy memberships at aussieenglish.com.au, where you will get full access to these entire episodes of this series and much, much more. You can go check that out using the links below, or just go to aussieenglish.com.au. Once again, thank you so much for joining me, mate, and I will see you next time. Peace.